We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Aleph Amud Beis in Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 51b. And the previous summit, the Gemara was giving various explanations of the Brisa, which was quoted on the previous summit. The Brisa is discussing how much oil is in the Chavise Kohen Gadol. That's the minch by the Kohen Gadol daily. And in Rabba's approach to the Brisa, the entire Brisa essentially is Rabbi Shimon talking, except for that small part of the Brisa where it's clear that Rabbi Shmuel is talking. And at the end of the Brisa, Rabbi Shimon is just trying to determine how much oil is brought. Maybe we should learn from Parim ve'elim, the mincha that's brought, accompanying Parim and Elim, and then it would be a little less oil. And ultimately, the Brisa concludes, Rabbi Shimon concludes, that mincha haba yisaron, we learn the mincha that comes as an isaron from the other kind of mincha that comes as an isaron, meaning we learn it from the minchas kevasim, which is the mincha that accompanies the carbon tamid, and we do not derive it from the mincha of the par and the ayil, and so therefore, again, a little more oil is required, the amount of minchas kevasim. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, lo minu kohen acher tachtav, if they did not appoint another kohen gadol, let's say the kohen gadol died and they didn't appoint another Kohen Gadol yet, so Mishal Mi Haisa Kreva, so from whose funds would the Chavise Kohen Gadol be brought? Normally this was paid for by the Kohen Gadol, now there is no Kohen Gadol, and so this is a Machlokas Tanoim. Rabbi Shimon Omer Mishal Tzibor, Rabbi Shimon says it comes from the communal funds. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says Mishal Yarshin, it comes from the heirs of the Kohen Gadol. Ushleimo Haisa Kreva, and it's brought whole, and Rashi explains, Ushleimo Isaron Shalim Baboker, means to say a full Isaron. Usually it's brought a half Isaron in the morning and a half Isaron in the afternoon, but here it's brought a full Isaron in the morning, v'Isaron bein harboim, and a full Isaron bein harboim in the afternoon. Calls man she kreva mishal tzibor, as long as it's brought mishal tzibor, if it's being brought from the communal funds, it has to be an Isaron shalim, again, a full Isaron. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabban, and the sages taught on a brisa, Kohen Gadol shemeis, if the Kohen Gadol dies, velominu Kohen acher tachtav, and they don't appoint another Kohen in his stead, another Kohen Gadol in his place. Minayin shetehei minchaso kreva mishal yarshin, from where do we know that his mincha is brought from the funds of the heirs? This would be Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in the Mishnah. Talmud Lomar v'hakohen hamashiach tachtav mibonav yasa osa. It says v'hakohen hamashiach tachtav mibonav, and so therefore we understand mishal yarshim. Rashi explains hakohen hamashiach tachtav echad mibonav yasa osa. The mishal yarshim kreva, we learn again mibonav yasa, it's from his heirs that it's offered ad yamod acher, until there is another person that is appointed, and so again that is the source that it's mishal yarshin. Now yachol yakri veno chatzo, and one might think that he brings it again in halves, just like by the Kohen Gadol. Talmud Lomar osa, the pasuk says osa kula velo chatzi. We'll learn from the word osa the entire thing and not half of it. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. This is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, again, Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah said, Mishal Tzibor. Rabbi Shimon says, Chak Olam, it says Chak Olam in the Pasuk, and we learn from there, Mishel Olam, it's Mishel Olam, essentially that means Mishal Tzibor, and Kalil Taktor, it says Kalil Taktor, which means it's all burned, Shetei Kula B'Haktara, that it should be burned in its entirety. And Rashi explains, Yachol Yakrivu Yarshin L'Chatzai, and again, one might think that the Yarshin bring it in halves, Kimosh Yavi and Osa, which is what their father did, Mishal Olam, and then again, Rabbi Shimon's opinion, it's Mishal Olam, Mishal Tzibor, Mitrumas Halishka, that means it's from the communal funds, which are in the Trumas Halishka, Shetei Kula B'Haktara, and then the Brisa said, Kalil Taktor, it has to be Kula B'Haktara. What does that mean? Shelo Yasam Mimena Shirayim Lachila, that means it's all burned, there's nothing left over to be eaten. Now Rashi continues, Lishna Achrin, another understanding, Sheyaktiru Shlema V'lo L'Chatzai, and it means that it has to be burned whole and not in halves. Calls Man Shikreva Mishal Tzibor, as long as it's brought, as long as it's offered from the communal funds. The Vishlema Lo Pliger Rabbi Yehuda of Rabbi Shimon, according to that, Vishlema, in terms of the fact that it has to be brought whole, and that issue Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon don't argue. And we will therefore note over here that according to the first interpretation of Rashi, that Kalil Taktor means Kula B'Haktara, that there's no Shirayim, so then Rabbi Shimon actually would be arguing with Rabbi Yehuda. Only Rabbi Yehuda says that it's brought whole, but Rabbi Shimon would say that it is brought in halves even when it's coming from the communal funds. And we will also note that the idea of Kula B'Haktara, that's true by a minchas Kohen in general. Anytime a Kohen brings a mincha, there's no kmitza taken, there's no fistful taken, rather the entire mincha is burned on the Mizbeach, and that's true by the Chavisin as well. It's just like a mincha, any mincha of a Kohen, and it's burned in its entirety on the Mizbeach. But the Gemara continues and asks on Rabbi Yehuda, V'hai HaKohen HaMashiach L'hachi Udasa, the words V'haKohen HaMashiach, which Rabbi Yehuda is using to say it's Mishal Yarshin, that it comes from the funds of the heirs of the Kohen Gadol, is it really used for that? But Haimi Boile L'chidatanya, but isn't it needed for what is taught in the following Brisa? The Brisa says, it quotes the Pasuk, Zeh Korban Aaron Uvanav, Asher Yakrivu L'Hashem B'yom Himashacho. So this is the Korban, it's talking about Chavisin, this is the Korban of Aaron and his sons, that they're going to offer to Hashem on the day of their inauguration. The halacha is that the Kohen Gadol brings the chavisin every day, but any Kohen, the day he's inaugurated as a Kohen into the avoda, he brings this carbon. And so the Brisa now says, Yachol yu Aaron uvonav makriven carbon echad. One might think that Aaron and his sons, they all bring one carbon on the day that they're inaugurated. Talmud lomer asher yakrivu l'Hashem. It says asher yakrivu l'Hashem, which means Aaron b'fnei atzmo uvonav b'fnei atzmo. It means Aaron brings his own and his sons bring their own. And bonav, who are his sons, elo kohanim hediotos. That refers to regular Kohanim on the day of their inauguration. Atza Omer Kohanim Hediotos, you're saying it refers to regular Kohanim. Owenu Ela Kohanim Gedolim, maybe it just refers to Kohanim Gedolim. Maybe regular Kohanim don't bring this carbon on the day of their inauguration. Keshu Omer V'hakohen HaMashiach Tachta Mibonav. No, when the pasuk says V'hakohen HaMashiach, talking about the Kohen Gadol, Harei Kohen Gadol Omer, so that's talking about the Kohen Gadol. Hamani Mekayim Bonav. So what does it mean Bonav? Elo Kohanim Hediotos. That refers to Kohanim Hediotos. And so in any case, the question of the Gemara is, this is what the pasuk of HaKohen HaMashiach is needed for. So how does Rabbi Yehuda use it for Mishal Yarshim? And Rashi explains, Yachol yu Aaron uvanav makriven carbon echad b'yom himashchem. One might think that Aaron and his sons, they bring one carbon on the day of their inauguration. Uvanav b'fnei atzman. It really means no, his sons on their own, meaning l'shem hachinuch. It means for their inauguration they bring this carbon. Umeyoso yom va'elach lo, but they don't bring it any further than that. They only bring it on the day of their inauguration. Aval Kohen Gadol b'chol yom, but the Kohen Gadol brings it every day. Dechsev Talmud, because it's written Talmud, and so therefore there's this distinction between the Kohen Gadol and the Kohen Hedyot. Kohanim Hedyotos, the regular Kohanim, Decheshe Kohen Hedyot Nischanech LaAvoda. It means when a regular Kohen is inaugurated into the Avoda, but also Yom HaYamakriv Isaron. On that day he would bring this Isaron. Rashi continues with another explanation. Lishnachrin, another way of understanding this is B'yom Hamiluim Hayakach. This actually was just B'yom Hamiluim when the whole Mishkan was inaugurated. That's what we're actually talking about in the Brisa. Avoladoros lo noeg, but it's not true for all generations. But then Rashi says Velomi Pi Amora, this is not what was learned from our master. Oeno Ela Kohanim Gedolim, maybe it's just Kohanim Gedolim. Tachi Kamar, this means to say Karbon Ze Yakrivu B'nei Aaron Ledoros Kol Kohen Gadol Sheyamud. Maybe it means this carbon is offered by the children of Aaron for all generations, meaning any Kohen Gadol is going to bring this carbon. But that's not true, because Harei Kohen Gadol Omer, it already says Kohen Gadol in a different part of the pasuk. Ta'achi kamar kra HaKohen HaMashiach sheyamur mibnei Aaron tachtav liachar moso yasa oso. That's what it's saying. Again, the Kohen Gadol who's after Aaron, the Kohen Gadol who's appointed when there's a new Kohen Gadol, and again that's referring to the Kohen Gadol. So again, it's separate ideas. There's the Kohen Gadol's chavisin that's daily, and then there's any Kohen Hedyot brings this carbon when he is initiated into the avoda. And in any case, that brings us back to the question of the Gemara: how can Rabbi Yehuda use V'hakohen HaMashiach to teach Mishal Yarshin? Isn't it needed for this halach over here in this brisa? And the Gemara continues and answers him, Kain, if so, if that's all it was teaching, Lichtov Kra HaKohen HaMashiach Tachtov Bonav Yasa. It could just say HaKohen HaMashiach Tachtov Bonav Yasa. That's all it needs to say. My mi bonav. Why does it have to say mi bonav from his sons? From his sons implies from their funds, from their money. Shamat min atarti. So we can learn both halachas. We learn the halacha of this brisa, and we learn Rabbi Yehuda's halacha as well. And the Gemara continues for Rabbi Shimon. Now Rabbi Shimon, Hay Osa my Avidle, what does he do with the word Osa? Again, Rabbi Yehuda used the word Osa to teach Kula V'lochetzia, that in this situation when it's Mishal Yarshim, so they bring the entire Isar and they don't bring it in halves. So what does Rabbi Shimon do with Osa? Mi boile, he needs it for the following: LeKohen Gadol Shemeis, if a Kohen Gadol dies, Uminu Acher Tachtav, and they do appoint someone in his stead, someone else to be the Kohen Gadol, Shalo Yavi Chatzi Isaron Mibei, so he shouldn't bring a half Isaron from his house, V'lo Chatzi Isaron Shal Rishon, and he should also not bring the half Isaron of the first Kohen Gadol. In other words, the Kohen Gadol brought the first half in the morning, then he died. Now they have another Kohen Gadol, so he shouldn't use that Chatzi Isaron that's left over. He shouldn't bring his own Chatzi Isaron. It means to say then he brings an entire Isaron. But the Gemara continues and asks on this, V'tepek le min umachatzisa. Why doesn't Rabbi Shimon just learn this halacha from the Vav in the word umachatzisa? This was actually the derivation, the source that was brought earlier. And the Gemara says to that, Vav lo darish. Rabbi Shimon doesn't darshan the Vav from umachatzisa, therefore he doesn't have this source. That's why he needs osa for this halacha. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yehuda hai chak olam ma'avilei. What does Rabbi Yehuda do with chak olam? Again, Rabbi Shimon used chak olam to say mishel olam, that it actually comes from the communal funds, but Rabbi Yehuda says it comes mishel yarshim. So what does Rabbi Yehuda do with chak olam? And the Gemara says to that, chuka liolam tehei. It means to say chuka liolam tehei. And Rashi explains, chuka liolam tehei shetehei mitzvah zu no haggis ladoros. It simply means that this mitzvah is for all generations. And the idea is that this halach of the chavisin is for all generations. And Tosas comments over here, chak zu liolam tehei, this law is for all generations, forever. Tehava mina Aaron makriv chavisin b'chol yom. One might have thought that Aaron, he brings the chavisin every day. Ubanav, and then his sons, Bishash and Nasu, Kohanim Gedolim, when they become Kohanim Gedolim, that's when they bring the chavisin, only when they become the Kohanim Gedolim. Afal pi shekvar nischanchu b'kunas hedyot, even though they were already inaugurated as regular Kohanim into the avoda, but when they become Kohanim Gedolim, maybe just then they bring the chavisin. For Rabbi Shimon, Leslie Haisvar, Rabbi Shimon doesn't even hold that this is a Havamina, and therefore he doesn't need the pasuk to teach Ladoros. It's obvious that this is for all generations. And the Gemara continues and asks, Kalil Taktar Lamali, what does Rabbi Yehuda do with Kalil Taktar? Again, Rabbi Shimon said it means Shetei Kula Behaktara, which Rashi had two explanations of. But what does Rabbi Yehuda do with that pasuk? And the Gemara says to that, Miboy Leila Chidatanya, he needs that pasuk of Kalil Taktar for what is taught in the following brisa. The brisa says, Ein liela Eliona, I only know that which is mentioned above, meaning Minchas Kohen Gadol Bekalil Taktar, the Mincha of the Kohen Gadol, the Chavisin. There we have a command that it's all supposed to be burned. V'tachton, and then what's mentioned below, Minchas Kohen Hedyot, by the Mincha that's offered by a regular Kohen, below Tochal, that's not supposed to be eaten. In other words, they're both supposed to be entirely burned, but maybe the negative commandment of Lo Sochel only applies by the Kohen Hedyot. Maybe the positive Kalil Taktar is only by the Kohen Gadol. Minayin litan es ha'amar shel zeh bazeh v'es ha'amar shel zeh bazeh. How do we know to apply what's written here over there and what's written over there over here? You apply Kalil Taktar to Kohen Hedyot and Lo Tochal to Kohen Gadol. Talmud lomar Kalil Gzeira Shava. It says the word Kalil, and we use that as a Gzeira Shava. Nemer Kan Kalil, it says over here the word Kalil. V'nemer Lahalan, and it says further on Kalil, it says the word Kalil over there as well. Makan beKalil Taktar, just like over here we have Kalil Taktar. Af Lahalan beKalil Taktar, so too over there it's Kalil Taktar. And the other way also, or Mal Lahalan Litan Lo Saseh Al Achila, so just like over there there's a negative commandment on the Kohen eating it. Afkan, so too over here Litan Lo Saseh Al Achila, so there's a Lo Saseh to eat from it. And Rashi explains, El Yona, what's mentioned above is Chavisin. That refers to the Chavisin of the Kohen Gadol. D'chsiv b'kra b'reisha, that's written in the pasuk in the beginning. B'tzav es Aaron and Sav, Uchsiv ba Kolil Taktar. It says again Kolil Taktar. V'hadr kol Minchas Kohen Kolil Tia. Then it says, by regular Minchas Kohen Kolil Tia. D'mishtoi b'minchas nidvaso. That's a donated mincha of a regular Kohen. Uchsiv ba lo sochal. There it says you shouldn't eat it. Minayin litin ha'amar. How do you know to apply again both psukim by both? Shu shneim Kolil b'haktar, that they should both be entirely burned. And one who eats from the remainder of both of them is going to transgress a lav, a negative commandment. Talmud lomar Kolil Kolil. Again, we have a Gzeir Shava Kolil Kolil. It says Kolil Taktar and Kolil Tia Lo Sochel. It says Kolil Taktar and it says Kolil Tia Lo Sochel. And the Gemara continues and asks, V'savar Rabbi Shimon Mishal Tzibor Doraisa. Does Rabbi Shimon really hold that from the communal funds, if the Kohen Gadol dies, then the Chavisin is brought from communal funds, that is a halacha on a Doraisa level? V'atanan, but we learned in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah Meseches Shkolim. Amar Rabbi Shimon says, Shiva Devarim Hiskinu Bezin, there are 7 institutions of the court. V'zeh echad mehen, and one of them is as follows: Oved Kochavim Shashilach Olaso Mimedinas Hayam. If an Oved Kochavim, an idolater, sends his carbon from far away, so Shalachim Nesachim, if he sends libations with it, so Kravim Mishalo, then the libations are brought from his own money. V'im lav, but if not, Kravim Mishal Tzibur, then the community has to provide those funds for the Nesachim. V'chein Ger Shemes, and similarly a convert who who dies, v'iniach zvachim, and he leaves over animals for karbonos, yesh lo nesachim, if he has libations, kraven mishalo, it's brought again from his funds, v'im lav, and if not, kraven mishal tzibur, it's brought from the communal funds, u'tanai bezdin hu, and that's a condition of the court, kohen gadol shemeis v'lo minu kohen acher tachtav, if a kohen gadol dies, and they don't appoint another kohen in his stead, shetei minchaso kreva mishal tzibur, then his mincha is brought from the communal funds. And so you see from this Mishnah that it's a Tanai Bezin, it's not a Doraisa, like Rabbi Shimon says. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rabbi Avo says, Shnei takonos have. They actually were two separate takonos. Doraisa midatzibur, really on a Doraisa level, it should come from the community. And Kavan dechazu to come midcha kol lishka, but then when they saw that the lishka, the chamber, was under pressure because there were so many Kohanim Gedolim switches at that time, therefore it wasn't practical for the tzibur to have to provide those funds, so takinu deligbi miyorshim, so then they made a takana, deligbi miyorshim, the money should be collected from the heirs. But Kavan dechazu dekapashiba, but then they saw that the heirs were negligent, they weren't donating that money to the communal funds in order to provide that money, so now they didn't have the money, so ikmu doraisa, so then the Bezdin said it's going to go back to the doraisa, it simply has to be provided by the community. And that's the resolution to the question, so really fundamentally it is a doraisa. And the Gemara continues and quotes the next part of that Mishnah in Shkolim, V'al para, shelo yehe mo'alin ba'afra. They also made a takana that by the para aduma, there's no me'ila by the ashes of the para aduma. The Gemara asks on that, doraisa, isn't that also a doraisa? The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, chatos, it says by the para aduma that it's a chatos. Melamed shemo'alin ba, that teaches that there is me'ila by the para aduma. But he, it says the word he, it says it, so ba mo'alin, it means only with the para aduma itself is there me'ila, as we will see, not with the ashes, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Beis Amud Aleph.